Reddit by Reddit recap. What's the worst case of rich kid syndrome you've seen? Guy buys $500 headphones from a vending machine cause he lost his old pair. Like who is from a refine tech vending machine impulsively. Went to HS with this insufferably spoiled kid. Family had a couch in their home's elevator. And classical European sculpture. This was in the US. Kid talked down to about the less fortunate on a regular basis. Once made fun of me for picking a coin up off the ground. In high school a kid was bragging that he got in his third fender bender in his old car, 3 years old, that his parents gave him but he hated. So his parents were buying him an entirely new, current year, car to incentivize him to drive better. Someone's sister got $600 shoes so the parents got the other kid shoes of the same price to stop their complaining. Went to school with a crazy rich kid. His parents divorced and each decided to buy his love. Mommy had a real estate agency. So she got him a license and spoon-fed him enough sales for a 6-figure income. The dad then bought him a magazine. Yes. The dad bought a magazine for his 24-year-old cokehead son to run. Word about as well as you'd imagine. This girl would always brag about how she's been to every continent except Antarctica and that she's visited so many countries. Then she wondered why people called her the rich kid and insisted she wasn't rich. Friend got a theater with an arcade built over their family's 12-car garage. Parents didn't want the 5-year-old sister to be jealous. So they hired an architect to design and build her a fully functioning playhouse with a bathroom, and bedroom. Just the tip of the iceberg with this family though. So my best friend's wife teaches at a ritzy $40,000 per year private school. As in $4,000 a year for elementary and middle school. I think the HS is like $50,000 plus. Well, she teaches 7th or 8th grade. I can't remember. And she said she always goes around the class after the summer break and asks them what they did over the summer, and she particularly remembers one kid complaining about how much his summer sucked because he was stuck on his parents' yacht all summer and they didn't even take it to anywhere cool. Just silly. Worked with this kid who was a good kid, but completely disconnected from financial reality for most people. He'd just moved out west from another state and was trying to get on like a normal adult. He went to buy a new car and was shocked that they couldn't just bill his dad for it, since they didn't know him. He ordered a bottle of wine at a restaurant and the sommelier said certainly. Sir, then the sommelier whispered, just for your knowledge, sir, the bottle is $700. He looked straight at him and asked, is that a lot? The sommelier honestly didn't know how to answer. Good kid. And he got a lot better. But he just didn't know. Once he casually told his mom he needed some help with bills and she deposited $20,000 into his account. My brother works at a rehab center for the kids of wealthy parents. He's always got stories. But the one that sticks with me the most was a kid who was in trouble with the law and doing rehab before his court appearances. No. To look like a better person and hopefully the judge would go easier on him. He was mopey one day and my brother asks him what's wrong. The kid starts talking about how tough the whole experience has been for him. How it's been so hard on his family that his parents had to sell his house to pay for his rehab. My brother felt sympathetic and says, damn. That sucks that your parents had to sell their house over this. Which the kid corrected him. No. They kept their house. They had to sell mine. Knew this one guy at my college who didn't understand why everybody is so worked up about student loans. I remember him saying something along the lines of, why don't people just pay the tuition up front? He was also quite sheltered. Just stop being poor. But I worked at a Starbucks and we hired a new guy who I was training. At one point, I had to show him how to clean the restrooms. I grab bleach and hand him a pair of gloves and he looks at me in disgust and says, we don't have maid to clean the bathrooms? He quit the next day lol. One of my college classmates wrecked his Range Rover over winter break and came back in an Aston Martin. In college I wrecked my 1998 Toyota and came back in a 1998 Toyota with the front bumper missing. I wouldn't say rich kid but definitely spoiled brat who thought he was rich. Befriend him in 5th grade over our interest in the UGR trading card game. First time I hung out at his place I noticed just how littered with stuff his room was. So even unopened. I showed him some rare card that I had recently pulled from a pack. He got super jealous and angry that I wouldn't trade or sell it to him. He immediately got up and walked over to the family computer and booted up a site where you could buy cards and various other toys and such. Completely ignoring having me over, he's now on an online shopping spree adding stuff to the cart. After adding a few things he yells where's the credit card, and immediately his older sister comes running up the stairs to yell Kyle. Mom said no more buying stuff online. And closes the website and shuts off the computer. Kyle then proceeds to have a crying tantrum on the floor and I'm just standing there over him in shock at what's happening and how he's acting. I slowly stopped hanging out with him until completely avoiding him as his temperament got worse. Kid wasn't even rich either if I remember correctly, both of his parents were cops. I could absolutely survive on my own. My parents just pay for my food and house but I pay for everything else. If I got a job I could pay for my food and house too, said at 18. In middle of a discussion between two middle class peers who were talking about saving money because they had to pay for their own college and living expenses. About 5 minutes prior to this conversation, both peers had ordered the cheap dinner options and declined a shopping trip later that night. While rich girl was talking non-stop about buying the best most expensive souvenirs for her friends. Once tried working a regular person retail job and quit within a couple weeks as it just wasn't right and I didn't like it. Reed had actual responsibilities for the first time. Moved cross country for an 8-month education course. Where her parents pay food, rent, and school. They also gave her a debit card which replenishes up to $500 when it hits $50. She still posts Snapchats with captions of that broke person life over pictures of her getting Starbucks every day. And insists she could survive on her own. Constantly suggests the most expensive options for meals, activities, etc. And tax on things like we can just split the bill. I know you're saving but it's just, amount at least $50. You'll be fine, right? Then gets upset when people can't afford to spend time with her. Or when someone dares to suggest that she helps cover costs. This is pretty tame. But it's what I got. I used to work as an after-school babysitter for a loaded doctor couple with 2 kids. My job was mainly to pick up the younger kid from school and hang out till his parents got home. He was a good kid, but coddled and immature. He was in 5th or 6th grade at this point. Oftentimes he would not be at his classroom when I came to get him. And school campus was huge. Different buildings, courtyards, playgrounds, the works. If he wasn't at his classroom I had to comb the whole campus. And he was rarely in the same place twice. He had a cell phone, but usually ignored its existence except for playing games on it in the car. The school was in the city and I had to park on the street. A couple of times I wound up with parking tickets because, despite having stuffed the meter with enough quarters to presumably result in ample time, the search for my charge would take much longer than anticipated. After a point, I mentioned this to him, calmly asking that he respect my time and stay in a set location so that I don't end up with a $25 ticket again. He looked at me with a good-natured shrug and said, well, that's not much. You can't afford that. Sonny. Your parents paid me $140 a week and I was in college. I know you live in a $1.4 million house and your dad buys you an expensive new toy every Sunday. But with money they are forking over for your education, someone ought to have taught you the value of a dollar by now. But honestly, he was a nice kid. They moved away and I hope he's doing well. One of my best friends is fairly wealthy, super sweet. Never brags. But sometimes she just doesn't get it. And we were talking about debt loans in class and she turns to me and says, I don't get it. Why not just pay off stuff when you buy it? Her family has no mortgage or car payments, and I had to explain that many people can't just do that outside of not owning a house car. I work for a dentist and her son is a spoiled brat. He was at the office one day because she had to bring him to an appointment later that day. He got bored and went out wandering around some of the local shops. He came back a little while later and without any preamble walked up to her and said, "Give me $80. She asked him what it was for and he just repeated himself and she gave it to him. That's some really bad parenting there. A friend of mine inherited a lot of money. Enough to buy a house, and he spent it on 2 cars. A Subaru completely modded to Ken Block's version of it and some BMW. Both extremely expensive. We asked him a few months later why he didn't buy a house with it because he still lived with his parents. So he told us that he already owned a penthouse. He just didn't want to move yet. A guy looked at my $2,000 beta car in college and commented that it must have been really cheap and guessed $15,000. Babysat some rich kids. A couple gems where when we were watching a movie and she said someone was ugly because they were poor. Another that they left their stove at the side of the road for hobos. Kid was about 11. One of my friend's friends ended up paying for a night out, food and entertainment. He'd go up before we got the bill and just pay. No matter how much we argued with him and tried to pay him back, wouldn't take it. Nice dude, Madrick. This kid back in high school was whining, I mean literally whimpering, that he had to wait something like 6 weeks for his custom built BMW to come over from Germany. My fiance's cousin. He managed to crash 4 cars while still in high school because his father would replace them. When he moved on to college, he got kicked out of several apartments for owning a dog when they weren't permitted. He told me he didn't care though, since his father also funded his continuous stream of new housing. From what I last heard, his father is now paying for his long-standing cocaine habit. Went to destination wedding in Mexico resort. Rich kids rented a golf cart, tore through the streets and flipped the cart, injuring people and causing a huge commotion and traffic jam. A Mexican lady comes out and begins to scold them for their behavior. "You wouldn't act this way at home." Rich kids responds, "I promise we do." It was the earnestness of his reply that got me. Best comment of the day. I'm British and I was working this volunteer job at my local library during the summer, and when I was 20 and going into my 3rd year of university, I was volunteering at this event with a guy who was 18 and going into his 1st year. So we started talking about it, and when we got to finance and student loans, he actually said that he was annoyed that it was means tested, and if your parents were rich enough they would expect you to pay for it yourself. And this guy was actually annoyed there was an upper limit on getting your tuition paid for, even though his parents were paying for it, his accommodation, food and new equipment for him to use, laptop, textbooks and so on. I must have looked confused. I was completely taken aback by his statement, so he continued on that he would have to get a part-time job to have excess money to walk around with, and that the system was so unfair. I just couldn't. So I tried to level my face. This was a children's event and I didn't want to scare them, and politely excused myself. I had a part-time job at uni at a local cafe to help afford uni, and I had the luxury of being able to commute from home and so had no need to pay for accommodation. I know people who worked super long into the night to pay rent for accommodation, and then had to get up at 8 AM for a lecture at uni. And this guy's upset because if he wants money to go out to the pub he'll need to get a job. Let me reiterate, he was having everything important paid for by his parents, and he was upset that he wouldn't get a loan from student finance, so he'd have to get a job if he wanted to have any extra money.